There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Bookmaniac. Champing at the bit, first out of the gate with some recommendations for Women in Translation Month, which is August. It's very early in July, but I have at least one that is an out-of-print book that I will be recommending, so if I can sell any of you on it, you'll need some lead time to track down a copy. That's really the reason I'm putting this video out there so early in July. It's so early that the details for the Women in Translation Readathon, which debuted last year, as far as I am aware, it was the first time it had been done on BookTube last year. Those details haven't been finalized this year. I spoke to Kendra Winchester, and she told me it'll be later in August. So if those of you wimps that are only doing a 7-day readathon, you've got lots of time, but I'm planning, I am doing the entire month. I had such a good time last year with the Women in Translation Readathon that I actually tacked on 3 extra days to last year's. This year, that's all I'm going to read for in August, with 1 or 2 possible exceptions. Yeah, I loved what I read, so much of what I read last year, and I loved focusing on women writers, which I focus on anyway, but in translation it was just opened up worlds of reading and books and writers to me, and I want to submerge myself again. But here are some recommendations. I did a recommendations video last year. I will put a link to that. I won't be talking about any of those books in this video, but these are the books that I read and loved during last year's Women in Translation Readathon and since then. So any of you that were following me every step of the way, I did a daily vlog during the readathon and have watched me quite consistently since then. There won't be a lot here that's new, if anything, but I still thought maybe people that are newer to my channel might appreciate having some heartfelt recommendations for this type of reading. So the first one, and the one that is actually out of print, is this novel by an Urdu novelist, Altaf Fatima, The One Who Did Not Ask. I picked it up a few years ago in a used bookstore in Tokyo. It is out of print. It is available used online. And I started it during the readathon, and it took me about 3 months to finish. I loved it deeply. It was not an easy read. The translation was great, translated by Rukhsana Ahmad. But there's a lot of things that a non-Pakistani, non-Urdu reader would struggle with, or certainly I did, and that just deepened my fascination with the text, but I had to slow right down, and of course I was always reading a bunch of other things alongside it. But it was such a deeply satisfying read. It is about a young upper-class Muslim girl just before in the days of pre-partition India and carrying through the partition and all of the tragedy and violence of that. And Gati is a really independent, unconventional girl, and she develops a friendship early in the novel with a Chinese guy in her town. I don't know if her city is ever identified. I have forgotten those details. But they have a very close friendship, and the heart of this novel is that friendship, and is it ever going to be more than a friendship as they both grow up? And he's an indentured servant, and it follows their stories, but especially Gati and her extended family. And I got lost in the extensiveness of the extended family and decided fairly early on that I wasn't going to try to keep track of them. I think a new edition of this should have a family tree and a much better glossary of some of the untranslated text. But if you like a challenge, even though I only focused on the immediate family, it was still just the read of a lifetime. I am going to read it again in a few years and make notes and make family trees and just sink into it all the more deeply. But I loved it with all my heart, and I recommend it heartily to you. I have a full review for this and many of the other books that I'll be talking about. So if I happen to forget to mention that I have a review later in this video, please check my show notes. All of those details will be there. The One Who Did Not Ask by Alta Fatima. Another one that was a highlight of last year's readathon, I can't remember if I finished it up during the readathon, but I certainly started it then, is this Norwegian novel, Cora, Sandals, Alberta, and Jacob, translated from the Norwegian by Elizabeth Ropan. This is a gorgeous novel, and this one is in print, but I don't think it's necessarily easy to find. I ordered it directly from the publisher, Peter Owen, peterowen.com, and they delivered it to my door here in Tokyo, the 3-volume set. It's a trilogy, and I just loved it. I'm not going to take the time to explain the plot other than that it's an autobiographical novel about a young girl, a young woman, I think she's 18 or 19, Alberta, with a very screwed up family in the coldest part of northern Norway, and she's kind of an outcast in the town. Her father is a judge or a lawyer. She's got a cold mother and a bratty brother who is Joseph. And it just brought these people alive. It has a gorgeous opening paragraph that I've read in other videos, I think including my review video. So just check out my review for further details. But if you like coming-of-age stories and fully developed, not necessarily likable characters, the protagonist I liked very much. But well painted, the grayness of her relationships with people was beautifully rendered on the page. I can't recommend this highly enough. I am doing volume 2 with Celia next month. And this was another highlight of the Women in Translation Readathon last August. Yuko Tsushima's Territory of Light. Its English language debut was just before that. I didn't quite love it, but I really, really liked it. In fact, it's left such a marvelous aftertaste that I may have to go back and give it 5 stars instead of 4. It's a short novella about a single mother who leaves her husband, or her husband leaves her, I think, and she moves with her young daughter into a top-floor apartment and tries to make a new life. And she does not have the benefit of a lot of interpersonal or intrapersonal resources with which to make that new life, and so there's a lot of awkwardness and loneliness and fucked upness, but she does her absolute best, and you can't help rooting for her. The young daughter jumps off the page, and the apartment that is completely on all 4 sides windows was a character in the novel, and I think back to that space often, and especially whenever I think of this novel, I think of that apartment. It's quirky, and the best thing coming out of Japan in years. There's not much good fiction from Japan, that's my opinion, and this is one of the good ones. I don't have a full review of this, but that's what I would say to recommend it to you now. It's really, really intriguing. I'm hoping to read another translated work of fiction by Tsushima next month as well. 2 more quick ones that I read during the readathon, and then I'll move on to what I've read since. One was a audio version of a 2-person play, and it's called The Unexpected Man by Jasmina Reza, translated by Christopher Hampton. And I can't even remember where Reza's from. Iran, I want to say. Oh, Reza was born in France. Yeah, she's French. Her father was Jewish-Iranian background, mother Jewish-Hungarian. She is a French writer. I had forgotten those details. This play, it's about an hour or an hour and a half. I listened to the audio on Scribd. A woman gets on a train, and in her purse, she has the newly released novel by her favorite novelist. And then that novelist, comes and sits in the same compartment. She recognizes him. He doesn't obviously recognize her. And it's their interior monologues as they share this train ride together. And it's fascinating. I absolutely loved it. I listened to it as an audio book, audio drama on Scribd, and would highly recommend it in that form. With a very surprising, satisfying ending, I thought. The last thing, I read other stuff that I'm not recommending because I didn't like, but the last thing that I read during the readathon that I absolutely loved was a book of poetry by Wisława Szymborska, a Polish poet. The collection was called Here, translated by Stanislaw Barunczak and Claire Kavanagh. Just gorgeously translated, gorgeous, wonderful poems. I'm not much of a poetry reader, and I absolutely loved them, which, note to self, I should try another one of her collections for the Women in Translation month in August. Because, yeah, I don't know how to talk about poetry, so that's all I'm going to say, but I do recommend it. So those are the ones that I read during the readathon, or started during the readathon. So now let's move to other stuff I've read since. Some of which I just didn't get to during that 7-day readathon, and others that I just came across later. And one of them was this, Angel of Oblivion by Maja Harlap, translated from the German by Tess Lewis. And I have a full review on this, and I'm not entirely pleased with it. It was a novel that kind of confounded me, yet I loved it. So it was a 5-star read, despite it not being a perfect novel. It's about a young Slovenian-Austrian girl growing up in the 1960s with her parents and a grandmother, and they're very close to the Slovenian border, although in her childhood it would have been, I don't think Slovenia existed, but she's Austrian, but of Slovenian extraction. And it's about being a member of a minority ethnic group and discriminated against within her country, but even more intensely about her father and grandmother recovering from World War II and the Holocaust. The Slovenian Austrians were one of the only... my memory of the history, and I don't want to mangle it here, but my memory is the Slovenian Austrians were the only, or the major group within Austria to actually fight the Nazis. And so when they were caught by the Nazis, they were dragged off to the camps or tortured or whatever. And so her father got so much trauma, and the grandmother has dealt with it in a better way, but she went to the camps and came home years later. And the remembering of that and the attempts to heal that, or the complete inability to deal with that, is what made this novel such an intense experience. But there's also beautiful set pieces about the farm life and about the grandmother's relationship with the granddaughter and the mother's relationship with her mother-in-law. There's all kinds of other stuff going on, but the heart of it was a tough read that got all the way inside me. I have a review. I think I've just said it better here than I said in that review, but if you want to check out further of my comments from when I read it several months back, I'll put the link in the show notes. Oof. I'll talk about these two together, both by Ariana Harwich, an Argentinian writer. Die, My Love, her first work to be translated into English, and it was longlisted for the Man Booker International Prize last year. And the one that just came out a month or so ago, Feeble Minded. I've read both of them and loved them. I think I might have loved this one just a smidge better, but they were both 5-star reads. And the madcap, imagistic zaniness of the writing style and the story is reminiscent for me of Muriel Sparks' The Driver's Seat. So if you like that, you might like these. Grotesque in places, just images popping like popcorn on every page and every sentence. I don't like that kind of writing, and I loved these. So I don't know how to describe what made me love these when I don't like kind of that surreal, what the hell's going on tiny kind of writing, but it works here. Both of our books are translated by Annie McDermott and Carolina Arloff, are gorgeous translations, and that's all I know how to say. You just have to try them. So, try them. This novel from Oman, Celestial Bodies by Joka Al-Harti, translated from the Arabic by Marilyn Booth, won the Man Booker International Prize this year. I read it in January and loved it. I have a full review. I'll put a link in the show notes. So everybody's been talking about it recently, so I won't talk about it. I'll just refer you to my review. But yeah, this was fantastic. This one I read earlier this year, I believe, for Britta Bowler's Nobel Women reading club, reading discussion. Sigrid Undset's Christian Lavensdatter, Volume 1, called The Wreath. I didn't get it read in time to participate in her video discussion, but I did finish it eventually and really loved it. And this won the Nobel... Well, she won the Nobel Prize in 1928. This one was published in 1920. So this is part of what won her the prize, I guess. Translated from, I always get stuck on this point because she was born in Denmark to a Norwegian father and a Danish mother, but I believe her mother tongue and was Norwegian, and that this was written in Norwegian. I'm going to go with that. Translated by Tina Nunnally, and it's set in 14th century Norway. And that's all I'm going to say, but it's a pretty famous book. Others, people that I know, Doris and Ange and Jay Shea, have read and or are reading the entire trilogy, which is a tome. But I read the first one and really liked it. So maybe 2 months ago, I read this Japanese novel, The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. I said I'm not a big fan of modern Japanese fiction. It's mostly really bad, by which I mean it's not for me. But this was such a strong book. This was a buddy read with Jacqueline of 6 Minutes for Me. We both loved it. It's a feel-good novel, translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder. I have a full review, so again, don't want to make this video too long. And lastly, this is a novel that I finished about a week ago, translated from Welsh. Martha Jack and Shanko by Carol Lewis, translated from the Welsh by Gwen Davis. I really liked it. It was a bit confusing. I'm not sure everything came together in the end, and I'm not somebody who needs everything to come together in the end, but there was a few things that were kind of, but I can't stop thinking about it. It was really well written for the most part, or translated. It's about 3 middle-aged or even elderly unmarried siblings on their farm in Wales, and it's not a money-making proposition. They're dirt poor, wearing their dead parents' clothes because they can't afford to buy their own clothes, and lots about the animal life. There's some grotesque scenes with animals, not animal abuse, unless you consider raising livestock to be abuse, but I have never been more fascinated reading about farm animals and the other animals like crows. Like, it's just deeply described, gets all the way inside you. But I thought it was great, and I'm confused about it. I think you should read it and tell me what it all meant. I recommend it that much. Alright, so those are my recommendations for Women in Translation Month next August, or if you're a wuss and you're only doing 7 days, the Women in Translation Readathon, which will be happening for a week, as far as I understand, near the end of next month, and once those details become available, I will update my show notes with that information. But I think you should do the whole month, don't you? Alright, thanks for watching.
Thank you.